Yeah, so thank you so much for coming. And a massive thank you to Elle for agreeing to be spotlighted to join us for this session. Elle has got some great insights. I'm putting pressure on now, Elle. And I'm sure that you'll, find some things in what she says that you can relate to and that are useful, and we're happy to kind of chat about that as well. So yeah, so a massive thank you to you guys, a massive thank you to Elle for coming. Oh, and also I should mention that Elle told me a minute ago that she's actually got a massive ear infection. And has a bit of a jaw problem, and I can't tell the difference, but apparently she's speaking a little bit differently to normal. So
Yeah,
we'll take it easy on you, Elle, if you need to like stop for a drink or anything like that.
thank you. Yeah, I've got a bit of a wonky jaw because of my ear, but I'm sure you won't notice any difference. It's just that I can notice the difference.
So Elle, do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about like where you are, what you do, what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Elle, short for Eleanor, which you might have guessed. I'm 24. I'm based down in Bournemouth, so really close to Emma. And I'm currently living at home with my parents. I'm working as a project manager, and I'm about 2.5 years on from being in remission. So I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in uh, June 2020. So during the pandemic, during lockdown, and I came out of treatment in November and officially went into remission in January 2021. And slowly have built up to where I am now. So in a full-time job and working and stuff. But yeah, so I was 21 when I was diagnosed. But that's a bit of a very brief backstory.
Thanks, Elle. I think it's also just good to know it was, I mean, that was all through lockdown as well, wasn't it? So and,
Yeah.
I'm sure if anyone else here was diagnosed during lockdown or had treatment during lockdown, they might be able to relate to some of that. But maybe, I mean, can you tell me a bit about like what your life was like before you were diagnosed, just kind of in the lead up to that, and maybe what first made you think something might be wrong?
Yeah, so I was at university. I was studying at Cardiff University doing French and Spanish. And actually, in that year, it was my third year, so it was my year abroad, which was cut short because of COVID. So I had been living in Spain and then moved back because of COVID, and was sort of doing my year abroad from home. I don't know how that worked, but they made it work. And I just carrying on as normal. Lockdown lifted, I think at the start of June. Um, and that was around the time that uh, I, I found a lump in my neck. I remember vividly seeing my friends once before it all went downhill. And it was all like distanced and we met outside, and that was the only sort of experience I had of that lockdown lifting and not being shielded. So I had a brief moment of freedom before everything went to crap.
Oh no.
um but yeah, I found a lump on my neck, and that was the only symptom I had. I went through a lot of testing. I luckily had a good doctor who was quite persistent and didn't find one answer in one thing, looked for another, and then it came back as lymphoma. Further testing, it was Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then it, yeah, sort of progressed quickly from there. But yeah, I was just doing third year uni, working from home, sort of. I would say working, I wasn't doing that much. It was very relaxed. And then I was into the summer holidays, really. So timing wise, it worked out quite well. Is that a weird thing to say? I'd moved back home, so if I was abroad and it happened, I'm not sure how I would have coped with that, but I was already home. I was on my summer holidays. It was kind of like yeah, I had some free time to deal with it, if we can put it that way, if we can find any positives.
It's always that we're always trying to find those positives, aren't we, in anything? And it's that, to people that haven't had a diagnosis, it seems a bit strange, doesn't it, to find something positive. But I think it's yeah, when you look back and think about how the timing could have been worse, I mean, it would have been better to have not been there in the first place. But yeah, it's good to spot those, isn't it? How was your, like, I mean, how did you find like treatment? What kind of treatment did you have? Maybe talk a bit about that if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
so I went through the sort of what I think is the standard treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was 6 rounds of ABVD. And so that was chemo every 2 weeks. It was very quick. It now looking back, it didn't feel it at the time, but going into it was very quick. I was diagnosed I think a few days later. So I was diagnosed over the phone. Firstly, pandemic situation made all of that very difficult and difficult to go through, because there was just not as many like face-to-face consultations. Most of it was over the phone. So it was like a 5-minute phone call to say it's cancer, and then very quickly and swiftly got straight into oncology consultation, and then about a week later straight into chemo, and then every 2 weeks after that. And I think it was daunting because like I said, I was on summer holidays, so in a respect that was a good thing, but also it was really difficult because I'd started treatment and that university wasn't happening. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with it, and luckily there was one person that I could liaise with, and you're working very like theoretically, like saying I'm going to carry on with uni, not knowing whether you can or not, because you're not doing it at the moment, so you didn't know how much work it was going to be. And so I was going into fourth year. It was the most important year. Everything like was all of my grades were put onto that year because of being in the pandemic for my year abroad, so it was just like extra pressure, and it was a very like sort of confusing time. And I look back on it and I think I floated through because I just had to get on with it. There wasn't any time to process it. And I've spoken in Shine about this before, where you just sort of, you don't process things kind of purposefully or subconsciously so that you can just get through them. But it was definitely difficult because of the pandemic and having it go through so quickly. I was on my own for most of it. I had to go to consultations on my own. I had to go to chemo on my own. I think my family found that quite difficult because they felt quite helpless. And then you have that guilt. It's like, well, I want you to help me and I know you want to help me, but there's not much you can do, and all of that comes with it, and knowing that my dad just had to drop me off and then pick me up in a much worse state and drive me home, and then for about a week I'd be like conked out, feeling ill and feeling rubbish, and that happened a few times. And then obviously I started uni and then it got even madder. So I was then doing uni work on top of it. Yeah.
Well, I just want to go back to one of the things you said at the beginning, which was that you were diagnosed, you were told about your diagnosis on the phone. Like how did that happen? What did that feel like?
Yeah, I think the original thought was that it wasn't lymphoma. I'd had blood tests and it didn't come up in the blood tests, and I was told it's not lymphoma. And so I was passed on to the ENT department, who did the biopsy and did a bit more digging. I had an appointment with them to discuss the results, and it was a phone call appointment. And the day of, they never rang. And then we sort of called up, complained, said, nobody's rung us, they've missed the appointment. It's fine, they'll ring you tomorrow. And the next day they didn't ring. And I was just holding my breath for about 3 days, waiting for them to call. And then they did. And it was, you don't know what time that phone call is going to come because it's already late and you don't have another appointment for it. So I got it. I was in my room on my own. Obviously, I just answered the phone, not knowing who it was or what news they were going to give me. So I was just on my own. I didn't think to go to my family or anything. And it was just, I don't know who it was. They weren't assigned to me at all. It was just sort of a random registrar, I think, who said, I'm just calling you to tell you that the results have come back as Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we've sent it to Southampton for further testing to work out what stage you are. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not good news, is it? And then he was like, do you have any questions? And he was very like hesitant, and I was like, well, no, not really. I've not really processed it. I might have some questions later. And he was like, well, you'll have to talk to oncology because I'm not actually the best person to ask questions to. And then it was like, ding, phone wow. Over, call over, and that was it. And then I just sort of went down the stairs of my house down to the kitchen, calling my family members in, and I was just sort of like, I don't know what just happened, but I have cancer, and don't ask me any questions because I don't know. And that was it. And then we just had to wait for the oncology appointment. And then I went into the oncology appointment, and the consultant was like, do you know? And they didn't know whether I knew or not that I had cancer. And so I think it was just one of those it was just a chaotic time in the pandemic. There was just, the NHS was under immense strain, and communication just went out the window. And yeah, it was one of those times that, it didn't really go to plan in terms of, I mean, there's no good way of receiving the news, but that definitely wasn't the best way.
I think that's an understatement, Elle, isn't it? It wasn't quite the best way. I think it sounds like they were passing around the, who's going to phone this person? Like, we don't, and the person that called you, maybe that wasn't something that they do as a standard part of their job. But it's, how long was it between then and you seeing oncology? Did you have to wait a while?
I have a feeling it was around 5 days. So yeah, it was a really weird time, because it's like, well, you kind of, it felt natural to tell your family and friends, but there was like, I had no knowledge on what was going on. And I didn't really speak about it. I didn't really talk about it until I'd had that consultation and I understood a bit more of what was actually going to happen, because I had some sort of concept of cancer in my mind, sort of the stereotypical, but I had no concept of what lymphoma was, because they'd use different words. And I had no concept of what that meant for me. And would I lose my hair? Would I need chemo? Would I need radiotherapy? All of those questions were buzzing around my head. And luckily, I was able to take my mum in for the first oncology appointment. And I think that was the only appointment that I had a person with me at for the whole, even until now. I think I'm just so in the mindset that I go on my own that even until now, I've still not ever taken anyone into a consultation or appointment with me, or chemo appointment. And that first one was the first and last time that someone came in with me to that doctor's room. So yeah. It was a bit of a mental roller coaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds just like, you've got that time to think. I mean, someone's told you the worst news and then, but no other information, or even it doesn't sound like they even told you anyone that you could speak to if before your appointment, or,
None of that. Yeah. No, there
yeah.
was, as soon as I had the oncology appointment, there was all of the support. There was the nurses to contact. There was leaflets and booklets, so many booklets of different stories and patient stories and stuff. But before that, there's nothing to process, like, because I didn't have any information. I'm one of those people that I went through my cancer very sort of like blinders on, like I blinkers on. I didn't Google anything. I think I searched up sort of lymphoma charities, but very briefly, and I didn't really want to know other people's experiences. And I don't know if anybody else has played cancer bingo in Shine before, but I've definitely had those incidents where people have said, oh yeah, I know someone who's had that and they died. And I was like, oh, I don't know if that's normal or not, and why have you said that to me? And I had nothing, like no knowledge, and I tried with ignorance is bliss, and that's kind of how I went through it. So yeah, I did wait until the consultation with the oncologist to get the information, because Googling is not, I don't think it's the one. I don't like doing that.
It's really difficult though, isn't it? Because I think, I'm surprised, like in that situation where you know nothing and you haven't been given any kind of way to get extra information, that you manage not to Google. I think there's we obviously always suggest that people don't Google, or think about asking other people to Google things for them, so that you're not seeing things you don't want to see at that moment. But to kind of live with that for 5 days before you got all of the info is quite a long time. They're quite big blinkers for 5 days.
And I think also, even I'm sure everybody feels this way when they go into consultations, but even going into that one to get the information and to understand what was going to happen to me, you still don't absorb any of it. I was lucky that my mum was there and that we had email addresses to contact people that ask questions. But even through all of that, like, I had a couple of questions. Will I lose my hair? Will I be fertile after? And that was it. That I didn't know what to ask. It was just someone's just put on the chat on an autopilot, and that's exactly what it is. You're just sort of like in a daze. And I was young as well, like 21, and a sort of this old man is talking at you about what's going to happen to you over the next 6 months. You're just sort of like, yep, okay, yep, and you just take it, and that's it. And it's just, there's nothing else to do. You just got to nod and smile. And I think I've talked about this before, is like your oh shit moment of you've realized you've got cancer. And my GP called me to check in, because obviously he'd put me forward for the testing and stuff, and he said, oh, how are you? And he just caught me off guard. I was just on a dog walk, and it was within that gap I think I saw the blur, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. He was like, oh good. I was like, I have cancer, but I'm fine. And he just went, oh shit. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm probably not fine, actually. And that he did it for me. And then that was when I was like, oh yeah, I'm not good. It's actually quite bad. It's probably worst scenario that we thought of actually when we initially did that blood test. So yeah, I'm not fine. I'm just on a dog walk though. So thanks for checking in. That was it. And
So
you just,
oh, sorry.
yeah, you just don't really realize until someone else sort of has that moment for you, I think.
Yeah. It's like seeing other people's reactions, isn't it? It can sometimes like break you out of that. I think a lot of people are agreeing with you about, being on autopilot or having your blinkers on, and sometimes we often have to do that, don't we, to get through, especially straight after diagnosis, if you've got a lot of treatment coming up, a lot of other tests or scans to have, like it's the only way to manage getting through all of the things that you suddenly have to do. But then, when somebody else reacts to our news, that can pull us back to, oh yeah, maybe it is, maybe I do need to think about that, or maybe it is a bit rubbish and I've just been kind of getting on with it. But yeah, it sometimes takes that, you need to reflect it in other people to see it sometimes, don't you? But
Yeah.
you said a little bit there about, talking to the, like, being 21, obviously, and talking to the oncologist who's like an old man in a room. And we've talked a little bit before about that you might have been more nervous to kind of advocate for yourself in those kind of situations as a young person. Do you want to share anything about that, or tell us?
Yeah, I think it's never a good age for it, but it's a weird age when you reflect back being a 21-year-old still at university and going through this, because although I'd moved out of university, you're still, you're still given a timetable. You're told where you need to be and what time you need to be there, and your life is quite managed up until that point. And I would say my cancer diagnosis was my sort of jumping into the deep end for adulthood. Like, really, that was the time where it was like, I've got to step up and be an adult here, and I've got to organize everything. I've got to take myself to the appointments. I've got to take notes. I've got to ask questions. And it was suddenly like, I've got to do this by myself. Like, there's like no one else is going to do it, and no one else can do it for me. And actually, logistically, because of the pandemic, no one else can hold my hand during it. And there was actually a campaign. It was called Hand to Hold, because so many young people were going through this alone and not having a sort of parent or a relative or friend being able to come in with them. And anyone who's gone through cancer will know that you go into those appointments, you absorb it, and then you either have to process it separately, or you forget it because you've got chemo brain, or you have to be organized and write things down and email them. And to be honest, I never found the sweet spot for it. And I would just say that I forgot most of it, or I just sort of was like, I don't know, because I would come home and my parents would ask me like what had happened, what the doctor said, and I'd just be like, I don't know, you're gonna have to email them yourselves, because I didn't know what I was doing all the way through it. And like I said, it was probably like the first big thing I was doing on my own, and was seen as an adult to deal with it and to go through it as, which is a crazy thing when you think about it, because that's not usually the first sort of adulthood milestone that you go through, but it was for me.
It's difficult, isn't it, when you tick the box at 21 of being an adult, and actually, it's not that you suddenly wake up at a particular age and are a fully competent adult and used to doing things on your own, is it? And that is definitely a big thing to be doing as your first kind of step into being responsible for yourself and not having people around you. And I think, like, a lot of people were nodding when you were talking about going into appointments and, you know, the information comes at you, but it doesn't seem to stick anywhere, does it? I think that's a lot of people experience that. It's different, you know, the stress of kind of being in an appointment, even if you don't recognize it while you're there, often means that we miss things, we forget to ask questions, we, you know, all of that, none of it kind of goes in properly, I don't think.
Yeah, and even if you do have sort of that understanding from your cancer nurses or anything like that, that you are a younger patient, you don't, there's almost a feeling that you're like, I'm not a normal 21-year-old, because compare me to any of my friends, I'm not doing what they're doing at the moment. I'm not, you know, I mean, to be fair, most of them were sat at home in lockdown, but I'm not living with other students. I'm not sort of living independently anymore. There was an aspect of me having to be an adult and advocate for myself, being on my own in those appointments, but there's also an aspect where I became heavily dependent again on my parents, and it felt like a massive backstep compared to my friends who were, you know, living with other friends, living away from home, all through lockdown, and who would then move on to, you know, moving to wherever their career takes them. And I knew that that wasn't going to be the same for me. And, you know, 3 years down the line, I'm still at home. And there is that aspect where you can very easily compare yourself to like all of your friends now going through those adulthood milestones that you were kind of like taken away from because you had to go through something else that was big and something less nice. They're going through all the nice shiny new things of flatmates and houses and jobs and stuff, and I'm going through therapy and chemo and having to have a big folder of all my health documents because it's important, and knowing that if I want to go traveling, my travel insurance is more expensive than the other 21-year-olds that I'm going on holiday with. Like all of those things, it's like suddenly like, wow, I'm quite different. I'm a different adult to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it must be really difficult to watch that. And it's, you know, I think we're all guilty of kind of comparing our lives to, like, I mean, they say you're comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel if you're looking at social media and stuff. But, you know, specifically like at your age and like when if your friends are like finishing university and like starting those things that you thought were going to be your plan, right? Like that's the loss of thinking about that is really difficult, isn't it? Just
Yeah. I think staying at university did keep my foot in there. Like I did stay a part of it to a certain extent, which was a good thing because there was something that was not cancer related in my life. It was difficult. It was hard to sort of be on the like process of doing a week being ill, a week working and catching up and doing that cycle over and over again. But I think if I didn't have the lectures or something to study or something to focus on, I would have felt even more alienated from my friends and what they were doing. At least it kept me a little bit in it. And it was an excuse to talk about them rather than talk about me all the time. Because that makes you feel alienated. People are lovely and they want to ask how you are, but it's not a normal asking how you are. It's how are you? How are you doing? And it's like, it's not good.
It's that head tilty thing, isn't it? That's I think that might be on the cancer bingo that you mentioned earlier as well, the head tilting thing. But or maybe let's tell us about, I mean, you obviously started treatment like you were in the summer break, you said, and then like where were you with treatment when university started back, and did you finish? Like what happened next?
Yeah, I was in the depths of treatment when I started back. I I think I had maybe three more rounds left. And so that was 3 months. And I started back at uni, it was full force. I spoke to them, and because it was all online, it was fine for me to carry on. I wasn't going to miss anything. I could catch up on recordings. So that worked out all fine. I got some good support in terms of like they tried to make me feel as comfortable as possible. I got some sort of I got, I don't know, not a grant, but they gave me sort of basically a voucher to spend on home things like a new laptop, a new chair, to make me feel more comfortable working from home and doing it all from home. So they were really good in regards to that. I was also a president of a society at the time as well, one of the biggest in Cardiff, and that was always my goal in university, to do that. So there was no way I was giving it up. So I did that virtually as well, and it was a dance society. So they would do their dance classes in the gymnasium in Cardiff, and I'd be on Zoom, and someone would set up a laptop so I could be on there on webcam, and I'd do it virtually. And we sort of made a plan for other people who were in working from home as well. So we did really well with that, and that kept me in the loop, and that meant I made friends. That, that was a nice thing to do, even though it was difficult. It sort of kept me going. And by that point, I was in the flow of chemo. I knew my symptoms. I knew it would get really bad, and then I'd have a few days of feeling fine. So I could plan ahead, and I was quite militant about my day-to-day life and what I needed to get done. And I, like we said earlier, you try and control how much you process of what you're going through. And I really did not process much whilst I was going through treatment. And because I had to park it, otherwise I would not be able to focus on my studies or anything else. So I'd go into consultation, I'd write notes, I'd have notes to give to him that I'd written down, over the week or whatever, and that would be parked. And anything that came up throughout in the in-between time, I'd write it down in my notebook, rate it out of 10 or whatever, park it, put the notebook away, and then carry on and focus again, because my mind couldn't have that whirring whilst I was trying to study. So there was a technique of like, just write it down, you've acknowledged it, put it away, so that you can get on with all the other stuff.
That's a really great tip. I think there's having the space to like think about that while you're going through treatment is pretty awesome. It's something that people think, I should have done that, like 6 months ago. But to get it while you're going through it is amazing. So did you finish your final year? Like where were you when that happened with treatment and stuff?
Yeah, so my goal was to get to graduation, to be there in person. and I did that. I finished the year. I got first. I put it on my CV that I work well under pressure, and if anyone questions that, I have a really good story for them. So yeah, I did it. We had an online graduation because, again, it was COVID, it was a pandemic. So I actually went up and met up with friends, and we had like a virtual celebration. We had it on the laptop, and we celebrated together. And that was the first sort of reunion I had with them, which was really nice. And then I think it was last year, there was a big in-person graduation for a couple of the years who had graduated and missed out. So there was a big thing in Cardiff over like a couple of days, and I managed to go go to that, and that was like a real like I made it moment. So that was really, really nice. But yeah, there was I would say all the processing that I didn't do during chemo, I had to do after I went into remission. It had to come out somewhere. It was bubbling and it had to find its escape. And luckily I found Shine. I did the breakout program. So I think that was in 2021 I did that, because we did it virtually.
One of the first cohorts of the breakout program, in fact, I think, or like
Yeah.
not the first, but like one of the first.
Yeah, it was really, really good, and that enabled me to understand what I'd gone through. There was a lot of listening and nodding and being like, oh yeah, that happened to me, and I'd never really thought about that, or I'd never really thought about it in that way. And that was really good. And then I think I parked it again because I needed to finish uni, and all the pressure with that. And then I sort of had the summer of seeing friends again and stuff. And then it was like, okay, well, it's gone quiet now because all my friends have gone on to graduate schemes because they've had time to plan for that and plan for their careers. Now, what do I do? And I had planned to go into teaching, and I went through the training and stuff, and I was going to go on a teacher training course. I tried it out. I was there for 2 days and I quit because it was way too much. And then that's when I realized I've got some more processing to do. So I took about 3 months just doing not much, going to therapy, and that really helped. And I was really lucky to be in a position where I could do that. But it just goes to show, like, I spent basically a year processing what I was going through before I could even fathom getting a job. And even then I did slowly go into it. I did some freelancing, and then I could take my time with it, and then I did a bit of part-time work, and I really took it slowly. And I just physically I needed to do that, but also mentally. Yeah.
It was interesting when you said earlier about like you knew that it was time for you to actually start processing some of this stuff because it was all bubbling up. Like, what was that? What made you recognize that, or what kind of things were happening that made you realize that?
I think it came really full circle when I went into remission, because just as I had had a 5-minute phone call to tell me that I had cancer, I had an unexpected 5-minute phone call to tell me that I was in remission. And it had none of the grandeur that I thought it would have. And actually, I felt really deflated and not really sure what to do with that information. I think partly there was like a lack of trust, because it was like, well, I didn't feel the cancer, so I can't feel that it's gone. So how do I know that you're telling me the truth? And I actually got them to send me my PET scans, which I would really recommend you do if you ever want to look back on what, you know, the how worth it is to go through the pain of chemo once you've gone through remission. Is to be able to see your PET scans before and after. And I've kept them on my laptop, and sometimes I do look back on them. Yeah, and it just felt really flat, and I didn't feel like celebrating, and no one around me really knew why. And I couldn't really explain it. I couldn't put it into words why, you know. I told my parents. My mum sort of was jumping with glee and was like, we've got to tell everyone. I was like, no, I don't want to tell anyone. I want to keep this to myself for a second, because I have no idea why I'm feeling like this. And if anybody comes up to me and starts wanting to celebrate, I'm not sure how I'm going to react to that, because I don't feel like jumping up and down and having a party. I feel like I'm now like, I'm in remission, all is fine, yet I am shattered. I don't look the same. I don't feel the same. I don't know who I am. and I'm expected to be really happy within a day. Like one day I'm a cancer patient and one day I'm in remission. To me, there was no difference, and yet everyone around me wanted to celebrate, and I was just sort of like, God, no. And I actually did keep it to myself for a day or two. I didn't tell anyone that I was in remission. And I think it annoyed my parents because they were like, I think there was that feeling that other people deserved to know. They deserved to not worry anymore. But I was like, well, I deserved to process this. And that was one thing that I was really clear on, that, and I recommend it to everyone, is to set boundaries on like what you want to share and what you don't want to share. And I was very clear that news about my cancer or about my treatment, about going into remission, was my news to tell and no one else's. And I was really, really firm with that, to my parents' annoyance. But yeah, that came from me and only me. And when I went into remission, I decided that I needed to wait a little bit before I told people, because I didn't feel smiley and I didn't feel great. So I didn't feel the same energy that other people feel, just as like, when you have that oh shit moment, it's when you see other people's reactions. It's the same with remission. You see other people's reactions and you're not quite there yet, and you feel a little bit lost, and it's really difficult to process those emotions. So that's when I realized that, okay, there's something here that needs to be dealt with. And so that's when I sort of reached out to Shine.
That was good. I mean, I think a lot of people were relating to what you just said then about getting to the, whether it's going into remission or getting to the end of a certain type of treatment. Like quite often, people around you, and we hear this quite a lot, and I mean it happened to me as well, where people are suddenly like, oh, that's great news, isn't it? It's all finished. Let's have a party. And then we never have to mention cancer again, and we never have to talk about this again. And I think for other people, and maybe not really close family and friends, but for other people on the peripheral of your life, maybe they can do that. Then they don't have to think about cancer ever again. But for the person in the middle of it, it's definitely not as easy as thinking, great, we'll have a party and then cancer's finished and it's not a word we ever need to talk about again. It just isn't realistic, is it? And I think, it's strong to be able to set boundaries is brilliant. I think a lot of people struggle with doing that, even if you recognize that it would be a good thing to do, or, I'm allowed to have boundaries around this. It can be really difficult to bring them up and enforce them, and to talk to the people around us.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that taking control of the narrative around your cancer was very like important to me. I posted about it on social media, and although like that seems like I'm being very open, it's my management of it. It means that if I put a post on Instagram, it means that I don't have to talk to 50 people individually about answering their questions, and it's my words, it's my choice of what I put out there. And I made it clear to people that that was the reason I'm doing it, not for that. It wasn't an open door. It was more just a management of communication for me. And I didn't want to be swept away with that sort of celebration of being in remission, because I wasn't there yet, and I had all of those emotions, and I explained it as, if you'd just been burgled and your house had been completely ransacked, you didn't know what was lost, what was still there, it's completely out of the blue, and it was so unexpected. You feel that shock, you don't know what to do with yourself. You're suddenly looking at your relatives like, are they safe, and are we safe now? And the police come by and say, well, we caught the burglars, all's fine. It's not. Have you seen my house? It's ransacked. It's horrible in there. I don't know if I can go back in there. I don't know if I can deal with that. Are you not going to help me? Oh, but it's fine because we got them. We caught them. it's not fine. Our lives are completely turned upside down because we don't know if we're safe or not yet. And that's how I explained it to people, is like, you wouldn't pop open a bottle of champagne just because the burglar's been caught, but your house is still a mess and it's still ransacked and you don't know what's been stolen. And that just would not be the case. And that's how I felt. My mind was the house. It was the mess. And I think that was that was the analogy that helped people understand why I was not partying yet.
Claire's just written such a good analogy, and that's exactly what I was going to say next. I think there's I think we might have to steal that for future breakout programs, Al. I mean, we do talk, we share different analogies, and I think sometimes it's a great way for us to understand, what we're experiencing through kind of treatment and beyond. And it sounds like that was a great way to explain it to your, friends and family, why you didn't want that party right then. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure Claire's probably writing it down. So we'll steal it from you. But I mean, what do you think then, just to we're coming up to the last 10 minutes already. Or we're in the last 10 minutes. Sorry, I can't tell the time. What do you think, like, through all of that you've shared with us, what do you think has been like the hardest thing for you to cope with? And, have you used any other tools? Like, you've talked a bit about things that you've done to help, but is there anything else that you would share with people?
I think the hardest thing can be communication, especially if you are going into things alone. If you are in the situation where you're in hospital and something happens and, your relatives can't get there in time or whatever it is, or you have to be there on your own and you're taking on information, that is really difficult. And I think having a notebook, putting things down helps, that sort of practicality. And also just being really clear, like, with your family, like, I'm not trying to be difficult. I have chemo brain. I don't want to listen to the doctor. I have no interest of really knowing what I'm going through, or I have no interest in making this easier for you. I am just trying to get through it. And it's talking in a way of like, I'm not trying to be annoying or not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to explain to you that, like, I have no energy for this, or I have no energy to communicate to you, or you're going to have to find things out yourself, because it's enough for me to try and understand it. It's even more for me to try and re-explain it to you and relive it for you. And that comes, with, like I said, taking control on how you communicate things and how you manage that. So yeah, I think that was the hardest thing for me. And even after that, it has been hard. And you sort of, I think the Shine group helped because we talked about ways that you can talk to family members and relatives about what you're feeling and what you're going through. Yeah, that was it's just hard to, if you're not processing it yourself, you cannot articulate it. It's just impossible. And nobody can expect it from you either. And so sometimes those conversations come a bit later once you have processed things, and people just have to be patient, unfortunately. And that's why I said to them when I went into remission, people are just going to have to be patient for the news. They're none the wiser that I've got the news that I'm in remission. So it makes no difference. They can worry for a couple of days more whilst I process this. Like, with that, you are the most important person. So you be a bit selfish with that.
That's a brilliant top tip. I think that's there's we're often, like, we worry about other people around us, we worry about, oh, someone's going to be offended if I say this, or so if I don't tell that person, they're going to be upset with me. And actually, it is really important to remember that you're the person in the middle of all this, and you're the person whose feelings and health and mental health around all of that matters the most. So yeah, I think that's a great tip. But I'm going to ask you just for the final minute or so, because I'm sure people will want to say thank you and goodbye before we finish. But if you were going to give one piece of advice to someone who's just starting treatment, what would that be out of everything? There's so much, I know, hard to pick one.
I would just say, with whatever energy or sort of means that you have to put into making yourself more comfortable, whether that's practically making yourself more comfortable at appointments or at home, or with how you talk to people, do it, because it makes the world of difference. If you've got a scented candle with you at the hospital, even if it's not lit, like nothing's crazy enough that I don't think that the nurses are going to be like, what? You just have to explain, this is just for me to get through it. Otherwise, you just have to find those ways, and don't think that it's silly. I mean, I ordered a towel robe because I thought it might make me feel like I'm in a hotel. And I got those little like hotel slippers and hotel robe to make it feel a bit more like a spa treatment when I came home. And how ridiculous. I feel sick and nauseous and horrible. But I thought, oh, if I make my room like a hotel room, maybe I won't notice. So it's things like that. It is worth it in small ways. Nothing's silly enough to not try. I just think it's just worth it to try and make yourself as comfortable as possible, whether that's practical things or emotional things. And like I said, people can wait to find out news or anything. It's when you're comfortable to do it, that's when you can do it. So yeah, that's my advice. It's very babbled with that, but yeah.
Brilliant. I think it's amazing. I think there's been so many things throughout this conversation that I think people will be like, oh, that I'm definitely going to do that, or I should have thought about doing that, or there's been some brilliant insightful things from you, and thank you so much for sharing your story so kind of openly and with vulnerability, and yeah, just that honesty I think is really appreciated and really shines through. And I think